April 1945. Northern Germany. A free French ace, Pierre Clostermann, is IND, leading a flight of 4 Hawker Tempests from No. 3 Squadron of the Royal Air Force, low over what is left of the Reich. Then he sees it a single aircraft below him, hugging the treetops, one propeller in the nose, another propeller spinning where the tail should be. He opens his throttle to chase. It pulls away like his Tempestus standing still. This is Hitler's fastest piston fighter, and it has arrived too late. Klosterman does not fire. He does not even try. He watches Germany's newest fighter disappear over the horizon at a speed his own aircraft cannot match, and then it is gone. This was the Dornier Do 335 Pfeil the Arrow, a machine that could outrun almost anything. The Allies still flew in the spring of 1945, and to understand how Germany built the fastest propeller-driven fighter of the entire war and never got to use it, you have to go all the way back to 1937. That was the year Dr. Claudius Dornier patented the idea that would become the Pfeil. 1 aircraft, 2 engines, not on the wings that made too much drag, inside the fuselage, 1 at the front, pulling, 1 at the tail, pushing, both in line, both along the center line of the aircraft. It would have the power of a twin and the drag of a single. If it worked, it would be a piston fighter no other propeller aircraft in the world could catch. Buten, 1937. No one in the German Air Ministry wanted it. Germany already had the Messerschmitt Bf 109. It had bombers. It had a plan for the war. Thought it was going to fight. A radical push-pull fighter designed by a flying boat engineer was not part of that plan. The concept was shelved. In 1940, Dornier's project was formally cancelled. The world was on fire, and no one in Berlin cared about an aerodynamic idea from before the war. Then something changed. In May of 1942, the Reich Air Ministry came back to Dornier, not for a fighter, for a fast bomber that could outrun anything the British could. Putin, the sky. A Schnellbomber. Dornier reopened the drawings. He began to build. But before the year was out, the ministry changed its mind again. Not a bomber, a multi-role fighter. Dornier redrew the aircraft. Every change reset the clock. Every clock reset. Burned months. Months Germany did not have. On the 26th of October, 1943, nearly 7 years after the Day, original patent, the first Dornier Do 335 prototype finally lifted off the bruise. Runway. The pilot was Hans Dieterle, a veteran Heinkel test pilot on loan to Dornier. The aircraft climbed, throttled up, and Dieterle brought her home safely. What he reported back was extraordinary. The Do 335 was not just fast. It handled. Pilots who flew the early prototypes said something almost impossible for a twin-engined aircraft, that it felt like a single. No lurching yaw when one engine failed. No torque roll. No sluggish twin-engine handling. Just power. 2 Daimler-Benz DB60. 3 inverted V12 engines, 1 hidden in the nose, 1 hidden behind the pilot, spinning propellers at both ends of the fuselage, around 3,500 combined horsepower, and the machine could hit 763 kilometers per hour, 474 miles per hour, in level flight. That was faster than the Spitfire, faster than the Mustang, faster than the Tempest, the Thunderbolt, the Yak-3, the Lavochkin La-7. It was faster than the official world speed record on the books at the time. But every miracle machine has a price, and the Do 335 had already begun to charge it. On the 15th of April, 1944, the second prototype went into a test flight at Memmingen. The pilot was Werner Altroge, a veteran engineer, one of Dornier's best. He was pushing the aircraft through tight rolls, testing its roll characteristics past what anyone had asked of it. He lost control. One of the engines failed. Altroge did what he had been trained to do. He pulled the handle for the ejection seat. The ejection seat did not fire. The Do 335 was one of the first German aircraft ever fitted with an ejection seat. It had to be. With that rear propeller spinning behind the pilot, an ordinary bailout was a death sentence. The man would be cut in half before he cleared the tail. So, Dornier's engineers had designed something no aircraft had ever carried before. Explosive bolts in the rear propeller mount and the upper tail fin. If the pilot triggered them, the entire back propeller and the top of the tail would blow away, clearing a path. Then a pneumatic ejection seat would throw him up and out with the force of about 20 Gs. For Werner Altroge, on that April afternoon at Memmingen, none of it worked. The seat did not fire. He was killed in the wreck of the second prototype. The world's fastest piston fighter had claimed its first pilot before it ever fired its guns in anger. But the German High Command was watching, and they had seen the numbers. In May of 1944, Adolf Hitler ordered the emergency fighter program, the Pfeil. Reich was collapsing under Allied bombing. American Mustangs were now escorting bombers all the way to Berlin. Something had to change, and Hitler personally singled out the Do 335 for maximum priority. It was to be produced in mass. Factories were assigned. Timelines were set. Rival piston fighter designs would be shut down or slowed to funnel resources into the Arrow. On paper, it was the answer. In reality, there were no engines. The Daimler-Benz DB603 plants were being bombed. Slave laborers were being forced to build components at gunpoint, and the quality of those components was suspect from the day they left the line. Aluminum was running short. Fuel was running shorter, and Allied bombers were hunting every industrial target that still mattered. By the summer of 1944, Dornier's assembly lines at Oberpfaffenhofen, southwest of Munich, were building airframes faster than the engine plants could feed them. Prototypes sat idle on the ground. Test pilots waited for aircraft that never came. And on the runway at Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's Central Test Airfield engineers ran the same numbers over and over, trying to prove that this aircraft, if only they could finish it, would tip the balance in the sky. By December of 1944, the first A1 production model was on the dot. Assembly line. A single-seat fighter-bomber variant. Its top speed, with MW50 boost. Injection was locked at 763 kilometers per hour, with one engine shot out. It could still hold 563 kilometers per hour, faster than most Allied fighters at full power. It could climb to 8,000 meters, about 26,000 feet, in under 15 minutes. It carried a 30mm cannon firing through the front propeller hub and two 20mm cannons above it. It had underwing hardpoints for bombs or drop tanks, and it had that ejection seat with explosive bolts, the one designed to save the pilot the rear propeller would otherwise kill. The first deliveries began in January of 1945. The war had 4 months left. By the time the Pfeil started reaching squadrons, the sky over Germany was no longer contested. It belonged to the Allies. American and British bombers roamed almost freely. Soviet aircraft controlled the Eastern Front. The Luftwaffe had lost its best pilots, its best airfields, and most of its fuel. What was left of Germany's air defense was a scattered, exhausted force flying whatever machines could still be started. And into this catastrophe came Hitler's fastest piston fighter, arriving one aircraft at a time, which brings us back to April of 1945. to Pierre Klosterman and his four Hawker Tempests. Klosterman was one of the finest fighter pilots the Free French Air Force ever produced. His Tempest could hit almost 432 miles per hour at low altitude, a monster of a machine. And still, when he spotted that lone twin, engine shape a treetop level and gave chase, the Do 335 simply left him behind. He would later write about it in his memoir, The Big Show. Two of his pilots opened fire from long range and missed. Klosterman himself did not even try. There was no point. The aircraft was, in his words, obviously much faster. That was the Do 335's first known Allied combat encounter. It was not a dogfight. It was a glimpse, a shadow at rooftop height, moving too fast to be caught, disappearing before it could be identified. That was the closest the Arrow ever came to changing the war. On the 26th of April, 1945, Berlin was surrounded. Hitler was in his bunker. Soviet troops were fighting through the streets above him, and on that same day, two Do 335 flights went into the air from Rechlin. Both used the same prototype airframe, the 9th prototype, known in Dornier records as the V9. The first flight was routine. Oberleutnant Heinrich Schild, a Luftwaffe pilot still recovering from wounds, took the V9 up for a test. Later that same day, he flew as escort for a small formation carrying Hanna Reich and General Robert Ritter von Greim into Berlin. When they landed at Berlin-Gatow, Reich and von Greim climbed out, commandeered a Fieseler Storch, and flew to Hitler's bunker to receive orders from a Führer whose empire had days to live. The second flight of the 26th of April was different. A German aeronautical engineer, Heinz Fischer, took the same V9 up from Rechlin. He was heading NATO, Berlin, Botto, Switzerland. He was trying to defect. His compass failed. He strayed over France. His fuel ran out, and when he tried to eject over the Vosges Mountains, the ejection seat did not fire. The tail jettison charges did not blow. Everything Dornier's engineers had designed to save this pilot's life failed at the same moment. Fischer bailed out the old way through the canopy. He survived. The aircraft was gone. 3 days later, on the 29th of April, American troops walked into the Oberpfaffenhofen factory. What they found was almost the entire fleet. 11 Do 335 A1 fighter bombers, complete or nearly complete. 2 A-12 trainers, perhaps another 9 airframes still on the line, waiting for engines, waiting for parts, waiting for the men who would now never come to finish them across. The entire program, from the first prototype in 1943 to the last airframes. In the spring of 1945, roughly 48 Do 335s had ever been built. 48. That was Hitler's ultimate piston fighter. That was the miracle weapon the Pasting Reich had bet on. That was what the emergency fighter program had produced in nearly a year of maximum priority. Meanwhile, on the American side alone, more than 15,000 P-51 Mustangs had rolled off assembly lines. Britain had produced more than 20,000 Spitfires. The Soviet Union had built tens of thousands of Yak fighters. The Do 335 was not a weapon that lost. It was a weapon that never got the chance to fight. 2 of the captured Arrows were shipped to the United States for testing. American engineers studied them. Navy pilots at Patuxent River in Maryland flew them. And then, quietly, the program was closed. Not because the aircraft failed, because it did not matter anymore. The jet age had begun. Piston fighters, no matter how fast, were now yesterday's future. Today, only one Dornier Do 335 survives on Earth. It sits in the collection of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum in the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, outside Washington, D.C. And there is one more thing about that surviving aircraft worth knowing. In 1974, the Smithsonian sent the plane back to Germany, back to the Dornier plant at Oberpfaffenhofen, the same factory where it had been built in the spring of 1945. In 1975, Dornier employees restored it. Many of them were older men now, and many of them were the same craftsmen who had assembled the aircraft by hand 30 years earlier in the last weeks of the Reich. When they opened up the tail section, they found something that stopped them cold: the explosive bolts. The charges designed to blow off the rear propeller and clear a path for the ejection seat. The mechanism Werner Altrege had reached for, and Heinz Fischer had reached for, and every Pfeil pilot in between had trusted with their life. The bolts were still armed. 30 years after Germany's collapse, in a peaceful factory in Bavaria, the last arrow still carried the same explosive promise it had carried in 1945. A promise no pilot had lived long enough to use. That is, the Dornier Do 335 Pfeil, the fastest piston fighter Nazi Germany ever built. A machine designed in 1937. A machine whose first flight came a full year after Stalingrad. A machine that reached full production only after Allied bombers had already turned Berlin into rubble. A machine faster than almost anything alive in the spring of 1945 that arrived just months too late to matter. Some historians argue that if the Pfeil had reached the Luftwaffe in 1943, it might have changed the air war over Europe. Others argue that the Reich was already lost. By then, no matter what miracle came out of Dornier's factories, Germany did not have the pilots, the fuel, or the runways to use it. The arrow was not the reason Germany lost. It was the proof Germany had already lost. So here is the question. If Hitler had ordered the emergency fighter program in 1942 instead of 1944, and the Do 335 had reached frontline squadrons 2 full years earlier, could it have changed the outcome of the air war? Or was the world's fastest piston fighter, no matter when it arrived, just a beautiful mistake at the wrong end of a war Germany could no longer win? Drop your answer in the comments. Serious debate. Welcome. This is one of the great what-if questions of Luftwaffe history, and I want to hear where you land on it. If you like forgotten Luftwaffe stories like this one, hit the like button. It genuinely helps. YouTube push this video to more people who care about the aircraft. Nobody else on this platform bothers to cover. And next time, we are staying on Germany's last piston fighters, but we are leaving Dornier. We are going to Focke-Wulf, to an engineer named Kurt Tank, and to the aircraft. He stretched, redesigned, and pushed into a machine that could climb higher than any Allied fighter could follow the Ta-152. Fewer than 50 were ever built. It arrived even later than the Pfeil, and when it finally reached combat, the pilot who took it into legend was not the pilot Germany expected. Subscribe so Eitland's in your feed. Thanks for watching.